Hey everybody, it's Tina-Desiree Berg. I'll be handling the Status Coup live stream today because Jordan is busy working on some important projects. And our dear Jen is still having some COVID long haul stuff going on with her. I'm excited to be here because I'm always excited to be with you guys. So today for the show, I have a show entirely based around economics and things going on with the economy here in the United States. I've got a guest that's going to be coming on. Let me. I'll be handling the Status Coup live. I have my live stream on here so I can read your comments. If you guys have questions, I'll be checking in with that over here. I wanted to, first of all, start out and mention that we now have 108,000 subscribers here on Status Coup, which is absolutely amazing. That would not happen without the help of all of our audience. We appreciate you guys. It's hard doing the work we do sometimes. It's not cheap to do it sometimes, and you are always there to support us. So shout out to the audience, and thank you for being interested in independent news, which is exactly that, independent news, right? There's not too much of it out there. So let's talk a bit about Amazon right at the beginning of the show. Amazon has found itself in hot water again. This is a company that has a long history of stepping all over workers' rights. And when Jen was out here the last time with John Farina, we actually covered a protest at Jeff Bezos' home in Beverly Hills. He has many homes. That's not his only one. And for part of the live stream, we weren't able to cover all of his speeches. So as people are sort of strolling into our live stream now, we're waiting for people to log on. I wanted to play a little bit of a snippet that I shot on my phone when we lost the live stream, because it's Chris Smalls, who has been organizing around changing things at Amazon. He's an ex-employee there. So let's run that video, watch a little bit of that speech, and then we're going to get into a conversation about what happened this week with Amazon.
Who shut shit down? Who shut shit down? Who shut shit down? Who shut shit down? He trying to lie and say he got COVID-19 now. I don't believe that shit. He's not pushing back this election. He's not getting the pass. This man's another one who don't pay his fucking taxes. $750. I paid more taxes than Trump, the president. You paid more taxes than Trump. That's a bullshit. Bullshit. And we not standing for it no more. We're tired. I know you're tired. I know I'm tired. I'm tired of being in the streets for months. I'm tired. But guess what? Not gonna give up. Not gonna give up. Enough is enough. 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 Defund the police, because all they care about is making sure that they can babysit us for no reason. They should be on the same side as us. But you know what? We ain't worried about them either. Defund the police, and I want justice for Breonna Taylor. That's right. Justice for Breonna Taylor. Don't get it twisted. Black people built this fucking country. We built this shit. Indigenous people built this shit. It's our shit. It's our land. They don't belong here. This billionaire, he don't belong here. This is our shit. This is your streets. I ain't from California, but I stand with y'all. That's right. If y'all need me, y'all call me, I'm here. That is power. That is people's power. That is solidarity. Whenever y'all need me, I'm here. Whenever I need y'all, I know y'all be there. You got my back, I got yours. TCOEW, the Congress of Essential Workers. Real quick, let me tell y'all what our vision is with my organization. The Congress of Essential Workers is to gain people's power, workers' power. Like ourselves, gain this power. Follow us, support us, join us. When we get enough power, we'll have more power than Congress. That's why I named us the TCOEW, the Congress of Essential Workers. We'll have more power than Congress. When Congress say you're an essential worker, you gotta go to work in the middle of a pandemic, we gonna look at them and say, well, where's my money at? I ain't going to work until you pay me my rightful due diligence. You give me a decent living wage. You give me Medicare for all, free Medicare for all. Give me child care. Give me $30 minimum wage. I ain't going to work until you give me $30 minimum wage. That's right. And I want people to stop saying we are unskilled workers. What the fuck is an unskilled worker? That don't even make sense. You got to learn and go through a learning curve just like me. I don't care what 4-year accredited college you went to, I still gotta teach your ass when you work at the warehouse. We want $30 an hour. I don't care about people sitting on their ass for 8 hours. Who else? Pay them more too. I don't care. As long as I get my paycheck. Y'all deserve that. We deserve that. We deserve better. This man making $4,000 a second, and I'm getting $15.50 minimum wage? Hell no. Hell no. Enough is enough. We're tired of that. We deserve more. These billionaires need to do more. 1% can't pay a tax on the people that's starving out here. We got a homeless crisis in 2020 in the 21st century. What the fuck is going on? Why do we have homeless people? And America is supposed to be the greatest country in the world, the richest country in the world. It ain't. Other countries are looking at us laughing right now. I spoke to them, trust me. They're like, what the fuck is going on in America? And I'm like, I don't even know. I can't answer that. But I do know that I'm fighting for change. I do know that you fighting for change. And I do know that the time is now. COVID-19, this virus is a wake-up call. Don't take it no other way. Look where we at. We still dealing with it. We still wearing masks. We still gotta. Life is not normal. It's never gonna be back to where it was pre-COVID. If you think it is, you're lost. That's right. The government got something to do with it, of course. You know that. There ain't no secret. Look what we doing. They only care about the fucking economy. The economy. And we all broke. We all in the same boat. That's it. Who shut shit down? Who shut shit down? Who shut shit down? Who shut shit down? He trying to lie and say he got COVID-19 now. I don't believe that shit. He's not pushing back this election. He's not getting the pass. This man's another one who don't pay his fucking taxes. $750. I paid more taxes than Trump, the president. You paid more taxes than Trump. That's a bullshit. And we not standing for it no more. We're tired. I know you're tired. I know I'm tired. I'm tired of being in the streets for months.
So that was Chris Smalls outside of Jeff Bezos' house in Beverly Hills a few months back when he came out to stage a protest. This week, Jordan had an interview with a sister of an Amazon worker that has now passed away from COVID-19. The story is absolutely atrocious. Basically, Poshan Brown was instructed to swab nose to do COVID testing at one of the Amazon warehouse. She is not a nurse. She wasn't trained properly on how to do the COVID testing. She ended up contracting COVID and then passing away. We do have some leaked footage of what that area, the testing area within the warehouse looked like. So we're going to play that so you can see. None of the CDC guidelines were being maintained in this environment. I feel like they've been very irresponsible here. You have it's a closed warehouse. There's no ventilation on top of everything else. And it's just frightful that this happened, and this is probably just one more example of Amazon stepping all over workers' rights and not getting punished for it, because that's the environment that we're in the United States. Jordan spoke with the sister. I want to play a little snippet of that interview for you. I'm hoping that you will go, if you have not seen the whole interview yet, you will go after this and watch the whole interview, because it's important. This is a people-oriented story. It's what happens when corporate oligarchy gets way out of control. So let's play a little snippet of the interview so you can see what Tina had to say.
When your sister started working in this COVID testing center, she told you that she was trained to conduct the nasal swabs on coworkers and that she herself was doing it on coworkers throughout the day.
Yes, on anybody that was employed, or first it was just people that was employed at Amazon, and then I think they started testing the drivers. So I don't know if I can say names. Like I said, I don't know. I just know that when she told me, I told her no, because mommy is bedridden, and if something happens to mommy, the doctor said if mommy catches it, that's it. She's not making it. My mom is bedridden. She's paralyzed. She cannot move from the waist down. So if something happens, that's it. It's over with. And I said, I don't think you should do it. And they're not paying you extra. I don't think you should do it. She said, okay, Chris, find me another job. And I said, okay, I will. But with the pandemic and everything happening, it's like, I mean, it's like she was, I don't know. She just, I don't know. I think that she never said no. Even when she didn't want to do anything, she never said no. And I think what I'm so upset about is that nobody from Amazon, just they called to see why she wasn't at work, has not called me and said nothing. They have not sent no condolences. They have not said anything about my sister's daughter. If you know my sister, you know she had a daughter. They have not said nothing. When the lady called me, I was telling her, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what happened. They saying it's going to be this much for autopsy, and we don't have that money. And I said, do you think that you could help out? Like, does anybody think? She said, I will see what we can do. If you have a GoFundMe, I'll see if we can put that on the bulletin. But, you know, I'll see what we can do. I never heard back from her until today, until she asked me, what about my, when did my sister pass? No, it's too late now. It's too late now.
Well,
It's too late now.
Isn't it interesting that she got back to you after, I mean, I'm not taking credit, but my tweet last night got over 4,000 retweets. And then after that, when it gets attention on social media, all of a sudden the human resources person reached out. When your sister started working in the...
So where I'm coming from is this is just one more example of Amazon not caring about their workers' rights or their lives. I mean, in this particular egregious situation, we had a death, and it's all in pursuit of profits. Larger profit margins, making money for their shareholders, and it's insane that this is where we're at in the country. As such, I wanted to go through a litany of other past grievances that workers have against Amazon, because this isn't the first example, right? This is something that's been going on now for years and years and years, and it's not been addressed. Center for Investigative Reporting revealed that Amazon had a situation, multiple situations where injuries, workplace injuries, weren't being reported properly, or they were being underreported. It was revealed in this report they did. But inside the report, there was this really horrible situation in which the death of an employee that was entirely Amazon's fault. One of the OSHA investigators was asked to play down the extent to which Amazon was at fault, and at one point actually tried to blame it on the employee. And the reason being was because the labor commissioner for the state of Indiana was looking to make a bid on bringing an Amazon headquarters there. And they were afraid if this was going on at the same time that they would lose that bid. So now we have a situation not only where Amazon is absolutely destroying workers' rights and harming people and killing people, but you have a government entity that's supposed to be there to check on that, not checking on it and being concerned about it, because they too want the tax base that they think that this Amazon headquarters is going to bring in. So this is a double set of egregious. We've also had stories where workers were peeing in bottles because they couldn't take the time out of their day to actually go to the bathroom. The bathroom was too far away, and they have these things that they wear that gauge their economic efficiency or their productivity as a worker. And if they don't keep pace on that, they might lose their job. So you had instances where workers were actually peeing in a bottle because they didn't want to take the 2 minutes it would take to walk to the bathroom. That's absolutely insane. You know, we had another example where they fired workers in Staten Island because they were trying to unionize. Anyway, and there's probably 200 more examples of this. So where are we headed in this country that we haven't dealt with this in any capacity? Jeff Bezos has done nothing but enrich himself during the pandemic. He's getting wealthier after we've relied on his services just to get the things that we need essentially because we can't go to the store and shop. He absolutely profiteered off of that. And he's thrown out his workers in the process. He could have had an RN present to take these swab tests, right? Somebody that knew what they were doing. You know, there was at one point, I know Chris Smalls filed a lawsuit alleging that they weren't even supplying proper PPE for their workers, which I believe is probably absolutely true given their track record. And then currently, I also wanted to bring up something only because in California, we recently passed a proposition called 22 that I'm going to talk about in a second. That is an absolute horrific bill that has now come to fruition in the state. I'm worried and concerned that this might become ideal open legislation for other states to latch onto and do their own bills. I hope that this is not the case. But there's currently a class action being formed for the fleet program that Amazon runs. That is a delivery service, right? So these are drivers. So there was a lawsuit that began before Prop 22 passed, and it was based on Amazon trying to basically say that these employees were independent contractors. And if ergo, they're independent contractors and not employees, they don't have any employee protections, right? We pay them as an independent contractor. We don't have to worry about workers' overtime, unemployment from EDD, a whole host of things, right? So the state penalty in California for misclassifying a worker is $25K per head. So if a company decides to misclassify one of their workers and say that they're an independent contractor when they really meet the bar for being an employee, the state can go after them and fine them $25K. I wanted to play an interview for you folks with Constantine Anthony. Constantine Anthony is currently sitting on the city council for the city of Burbank, which is a local municipality here. But he was part of the workers' coalition that was working against getting Prop 22 not to pass. And it came from another bill called AB 5, which he's going to explain for you into this interview. But when he was running for city council, Chris Smalls actually endorsed him and spoke about him actually when he was at the protest at Jeff Bezos' house. But Constantine ended up winning his seat on the council, which is great. I hope to hear great stuff from him. But in this interview, he does a really good job of explaining AB 5 and how this led up to Prop 22. So I wanted to play that for you folks to give you a better idea of where that came from. So you are a founding member of the Mobile Workers Alliance, and I wanted to talk about that for a moment because this is an area that I don't think is getting enough attention. So basically, you're trying to, my understanding is you're trying to unionize Uber and Lyft drivers, but not only the Uber and Lyft drivers, also the drivers that work for apps like Postmates, Instacart, things of this nature. And right now, those folks, in my opinion, don't get paid enough. They don't have unemployment benefits. They don't have any sort of workers' comp protections, anything of that nature. So what exactly is your platform for trying to achieve unionization? And then what exactly does that entail? Are you looking for the state to recognize them as employees, or are they still going to be gig workers with just more protections? Tell us a little bit about the organization and where you're going with that.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I got involved with a couple other drivers here in LA County, and we were noticing that our pay, the pay that we were getting from Uber and our rate was going down, steadily going down, which is very different than most other wages, because over time you normally get cost of living increases, but they were actually paying us less the longer we were driving. So it was very frustrating. And so we started to organize drivers and basically understand what was happening, learn about the Uber business model, because all we knew was how the app worked and how to drive, right? That was our expertise. I have over 15,000 rides with Uber.
Wow.
And so I'm a veteran driver. Most people are shocked by that number.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is a lot. I've been all over LA County. I've even had trips to San Diego and Las Vegas. So, I really liked the job. I just didn't appreciate the pay scale.
Yeah.
So we organized, and it's funny, when we started that, a lot of other groups across the country, even in Northern California, had their own organizing sort of established groups. And we finally came together, and it culminated in a bill last year, a state bill, AB 5. And Assembly Bill 5, basically what it did, it codified a California Supreme Court judgment called Dynamex. It was a Supreme Court ruling in California that said there are certain criteria that you have to pass in order to be qualified as an independent contractor. For so long, for so many years, basically your employer could call you an independent contractor and you, the worker, had to prove otherwise.
Right.
The Dynamex ruling said, no. We, the California Supreme Court, believe it should be the other way around. Everyone is inherently an employee, and you, the employer, have to prove that they are an independent contractor, and you don't have to pay for their workers' comp. You don't have to pay for their health insurance.
That's right. So
days.
just to elaborate on that, basically the two criteria are if you tell somebody where to be at work and what time to be there, they are considered an employee for all of these reasons. So I think
Well,
that's
there's three criteria. It's called the ABC test, and you can look this up. Anyone can look this up. The ABC test, and it's basically it's can your employer tell you what to do? Is that the only person you work for?
is that a criteria? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of qualifiers to this.
Okay,
And
so this is broader than just the workers' comp rule.
oh yeah, much more than that. It's the fundamental basic protections as an employee, against discrimination and harassment,
Right.
and lawful
Which
termination.
makes sense because right now, if you just use the workers' comp criteria, that applies to people that aren't really employees either. You can have a 1099 and still have to be covered on workers' comp. I know that's been a big argument for the film sets.
Yeah, but there's a whole host of things that you get as an employee that you get as a contractor. I mean, that's And so we fought to get that law passed. Lorena Gonzalez out of San Diego really spearheaded that. I applaud her for that work. And me and a bunch of other drivers, we all went up to Sacramento on the day that they were voting for it, and we lobbied in person. We talked to a bunch of assembly members, and then later we talked to state senators, and we said, hey man, we're the drivers, we're the ones who are dealing with this. This is what it looks like when you're in our car, because it's easy to just write it down on paper or think about it as an app, but really these are jobs, and people are doing hard jobs. I don't know if you've ever driven on the LA streets, but it's dangerous. So yeah, I've been a very safe driver, no accidents in 16 years, knock on wood. And that kind of experience and the quality of my driving is worth a lot of money. That is hard labor, and we deserve to be paid for that. So actually, the Mobile Workers Alliance is demanding that Uber pay us $15 an hour plus $15 an hour for expenses. So wages plus expenses would be $30 an hour, which is about $2 more an hour than what I was making when I first started.
Okay.
When I signed up in 2015, I was making $28 an hour. Cost of living and increases and inflation, I'd be making about $30 an hour if they had kept up. So it's not really an unreasonable.
No, I don't think it's unreasonable. Plus, you're paying for the care of your car. That adding the miles and the wear and tear, that costs money too. And that should probably be figured into the mix. Let me ask you a question though. There was pushback against this bill because writers, and I know I saw a lot of journalists saying this. I'm not saying I agree with them, but they were saying that they were going to lose jobs because of it, because they truly are gig employees, and that if they didn't fit the certain criteria, that they weren't going to get hired going forward. I think there was a lot of fear surrounding that. What is your take on that?
Well, to her credit, Lorena Gonzalez has worked with a lot of different industry professionals and has carved out exemptions.
Okay.
So the biggest exemptions that came first was, of course, doctors. So if you're a doctor, you work for a hospital, right? You're assigned to that hospital, and that's the person who pays you. But because of licensing and medical malpractice and the way the medical state board works, a doctor can't be directly employed by a hospital. So there's like this huge conflict of interest there. And so they wrote in an exemption for doctors. And you wouldn't even think about it. Like, if you were a regular person, you would just think the doctor works for the hospital. So there are very specific technical issues that need to be hammered out. And, the state legislators going through them one by one. Hairdressers was another big one. If you've ever worked as a hairdresser, you know you don't actually work for the salon. You rent the chair that you work out of.
That's right.
And so it's kind of a very unique situation. I liken that job much more to like the old cab drivers who would rent cars from their company. Uber, ended that industry completely. So
this is true.
But
very disruptive.
Yeah, very disruptive.
So you are a founding member of. Okay, so I am very, very excited to have Marshall Auerbach with me today. Marshall is an economist at the Levy Institute at Bard College. Welcome, Marshall.
Hi, Tina. Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Always good talking with you. Marshall, for folks that have never met Marshall, Marshall does a lot of writing in the area of not just economics, but left side economics, late stage capitalism. He's been published in tons of magazines. He's definitely my go-to person when I'm looking to talk about economics. I've had him on my podcast a few times. But today I wanted to invite you on, obviously, to talk about WallStreetBets. I can't wait to get into the short squeeze that's been placed on hedge funds, and we'll talk about what that means for the audience in a minute. But I also wanted to start off talking about Prop 22 because we were just having a conversation on this. Prop 22, yep. Almost $200 million of corporate money went into putting this on our ballot and getting it passed. And it's basically a carve out of workers' rights for Uber and Lyft drivers. DoorDash, we can include in that. Instacart now, we can include in that. In fact, one of the immediate fallouts of this bill passing was that Vons and all of their grocery stores, they have several subsidiaries, got rid of their union employees and switched to Instacart. So I think this has massive repercussions for the rest of the country too. What are your thoughts on Prop 22?
Well, I agree with your last statement. It certainly has vast repercussions for the rest of the country. There's the old expression, as California goes, so goes the nation. Unfortunately, that was true under Prop 13, and it's now could be true under Prop 22. Prop 13 was a big tax cutting craze, which prefigured Reagan, and now has basically decimated California's public education funding. So it is a real problem, and it shows that even if you try to prevent companies from exploiting loopholes in the labor law, if they have enough money, they can just find ways of getting around it, which is really problematic. But I think there's a bigger problem here, which is that these are social goods which ought to be public goods. Things like healthcare, for example, vacation pay. These are very common in Europe. They happen to be the cost of doing business in the U.S. is that they're employer funded, and so that in itself makes it very, very vulnerable to the kinds of things like Proposition 22.
Right. So, so the carve out basically allows to classify what would be an employee everywhere else as an independent contractor. So, as you're mentioning, public goods, they don't have health care, they don't have overtime pay, they don't have
pay, all the traditional benefits, 401ks, not the usual benefits that would be given to a regular employee are not there anymore. They're being carved out. And, as I said, the courts, the entire trend of jurisprudence has been around the world, in other parts of the US, New York, for example, in the UK, and also in Europe, it has been to prevent these kinds of loophole exploitations. And California, Uber and a lot of other these companies in California have just funded put a massive amount of money behind Prop 22, got it passed, and so it doesn't really matter. And the irony is, California always likes to fancy itself, the most progressive state in the country. But to me, it's another step towards neo-feudalism.
Neo-feudalism is a really good way to put it. I mean, so even though we are a one-party rule here in California, the Democratic Party, a good chunk of California Democrats are absolutely conservative neoliberals. They side on privatization, et cetera, et cetera. And, there's been a connection with the California Democratic Party and getting Prop 22 passed. We can talk, for example, about the fact that California NAACP actually endorsed yes on 22. Why would they do that? This is something that's obviously broadly against most of what their members need. Well, the current president is also, wait for it, a consultant lobbyist who does work on behalf of the parties. So clearly there was a connection there, and there's probably several more that I'm not even aware of. But
there's also the connection of Kamala Harris. She has a cousin who works as a director of diversity, and I think her brother-in-law is also on the Uber board.
Yeah,
so
he is on the Uber board. Yeah.
In fairness, she and Biden both came out against Prop 22, but there's an element of mixed messaging there. So big money is winning again.
Big money winning again. There is mixed messaging. I'm glad that both Biden and Kamala said that Prop 22 is bad. We absolutely should not make this happen. But the disease that we're looking at is the disease of consultants and lobbyists being part of the Democratic Party, whether it's in DC membership, whether it's in KDEM membership. A lot of these folks are consultants, they're lobbyists, they make their money by doing that kind of work. A lot of the messaging that they work on is finding a palatable way to present ideas that are not of the left to the left in a way that they might buy it. And it's been effective in getting bills passed in the state. This would not be the first time we've had a really crappy proposition
Well,
pass.
the message, they've been very effective with the messaging, but also bear in mind they've been funded very generously by the donor class, particularly in Silicon Valley, and money almost always wins out. So,
Yeah.
And that's why, for example, I think people coalesced so aggressively against Bernie Sanders' campaign last year, because he was one of the few guys that would have really understood those power dynamics and was going to do something about it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you had 200 million on the yes side and maybe 6 million on the no side. So I don't know. Plus every time somebody logged into Uber and Lyft in California, they got this ridiculous message about why they should vote, yes on 22. So
yeah, and the
what do
irony
you
is,
do?
of course, that it's a form of social dumping, because none of these companies, even with these neo-feudal regulations, still don't make money. They're hemorrhaging cash, but they're being buttressed by an IPO bubble.
Right.
Part of what we're seeing now in Wall Street and other areas. So they keep getting money, even though they're losing money. I guess their hope is that they could stall for as long as they can until they ultimately replace the drivers with their self-driving cars. Maybe that's the long-term plan, but who knows? But it's certainly not, even under the slave wages that they pay, it's not a viable economic model. That's what's so pathetic about it.
Yeah, no, it's not. You're right. They're losing money on top of everything else. So let's talk about Wall Street Bets for a second, because this, to me, is absolutely hysterical on so many levels. Here we have a situation in which a bunch of folks, many of them young kids, got together on Reddit, and they basically engaged in what I would call a short squeeze on hedge funds. So this is sort of a Robin Hood story of a group of people saying, we're going to use the same tactics that you guys have been using ourselves and see if we can make some money on it. I think in order for people to understand what's really going on here, we have to kind of have a conversation about the lingo and what's happening here. So a short squeeze, short selling stock, right? So these guys are basically buying stock that they don't own, that they need to cover that position later.
They're selling stock they don't own.
Selling stock. Yeah.
They borrow the stock, they sell it into the market. I sell a stock at say $10. I hope it goes to $2. I buy it back.
Right.
And
you're making money on the spread. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, but of course, if it goes the other way, you have an unlimited liability.
So it is risky.
If the stock goes from 10 to 300, as this one has done, then it's a problematic situation for the short seller.
It is risky, but I think what these guys did that was really smart here, from what I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, is they were looking at positions that had very large percentage of short attached, right? So if, like GameStop, for example, and I know it wasn't just GameStop. Somebody told me that they were looking at Express.
AMC is another one that they've been targeting. Yeah. I used to see this all the time in Japan as well. You get these stock syndicates that would start ramping up stocks that had been shorted by various hedge funds, and so it's not unusual. And of course, it was very unpleasant one hedge fund actually had to be bailed out by Steve Cohen, the owner of the Mets. As I always say, casino capitalism is great when you're the house, but when the house itself goes bust, that's not a good feeling. So all of these guys, that the next time they go on about their rhetoric about the virtues of free market, remember that it's only free for the 99% of us. It's socialism for the rich.
That's right.
And the tables were turned. I don't think it's the overall symptom. I don't think is a very healthy state of affairs in terms of what it means for our markets and also for our economy. But there is an element of Schadenfreude when you see who actually seems to be on the receiving end of this.
For once, exactly. So, and now you see reports of some of these guys. I love that they're painting the Reddit folks as these horrible individuals that are breaking, SEC law. And I look at this and I'm like, wait a second, this is stuff that hedge funds have been doing as a matter of course in their business for a long time now. The difference is it's always been easier for a hedge fund to do this because of the amount of capital that they have in their possession. So,
that's right. And also, look, what they're complaining about also is the product of decades of deregulation and non-supervision of the kind that Wall Street has been lobbying for, and so they're reaping the fruits of their own ill-gotten strategy.
Right.
So, I mean, the fact of the matter is the SEC, to cite one obvious institution, has become a joke. It hasn't been serious about enforcing things like stock manipulation really since the early 1980s. I mean, stock buybacks, for example, used to be prevented because they were considered to be a form of stock manipulation. And now there are, since they're such an important part of CEO compensation via stock options, they've been given a safe harbor. So the interesting thing to me will be that you've got a new sheriff on Wall Street right now, Gary Gensler, who is an ex-Wall Street guy. He's an ex-Goldman, so he's made his money, so he doesn't have to wait for his payoff if he does a non-job, so to speak. But I think Gensler, when he was head of the CFTC under Obama, was actually quite serious about regulation. And I think it will be very, very interesting to see whether he does start taking actions against a lot of these big speculative activities. I think he will, and I think that could change the complexion of Wall Street and indeed make it less casino capitalism in the future.
You know, and that's exactly what it is. It's casino capitalism at this point. I often say that the stock market has not been a gauge for the economy, broader economy, for a long time now. It's more or less a chart of rich people's fifis, their feelings, right?
Yeah,
it's completely disconnected.
Yeah, it has no bearing to reality. And of course, with the actions undertaken by the Fed over the last year, it has totally detached the market from any kinds of real fundamentals. You've effectively got them backstopping every single trade. And yet at the same time, the Fed still finds it difficult to use its municipal loan facility to help municipalities and states that are actually suffering from massive declines in revenue. But, you know, a corporate bond from Philip Morris, is something that is perfectly acceptable for the Fed to backstop. So it's a very, very perverse set of incentives that are being created, and it also reflects a very perverse set of values that are reflected in our current system.
Let's go a little bit deeper on what you're talking about right now so people understand what you're saying, because I think this is a really salient point you're making. They're backstopping corporate bonds, but they're not backstopping municipal bonds, which are city-state.
Yes. In fact, David Dyan, who's the editor of the American Prospect, has written about this very extensively and eloquently. But, you know, he has pointed out, and Bob Hockett is another person who's written Forbes, that there is a facility, a municipal loan facility, which the Federal Reserve could have used to help backstop municipal debt. The problem was that they claimed that they had to charge very, very high rates of collateral or interest rates for it, which made it completely uneconomic for a lot of municipalities to use the facilities. Now, I think that's a lot of crap. I think they actually could have given extended loans and let them roll over indefinitely. But they didn't do so. I think they felt that the political heat from the then GOP-dominated Congress would have been too great. But there is definitely a double standard at play here.
And it's a dangerous one. You know, at some point, we're going to have a conversation about where capitalism is leading us. You know, we have a system, especially in the United States.
If you want to call it capitalism. I mean,
I know.
That's I think, the problem right now. It's not really capitalism anymore.
It's,
even if you believe in markets.
Oligarchy, like our markets definitely aren't free. They're rigged to the capitalists. Point being that our entire system is based on consumption. And right now, I mean, the last time we talked about this, and it's gotten much worse since the last time we talked about this, people don't have any expendable income with which to be consuming with. So at some point, the 1% is going to have a realization that everybody else doesn't have any money to buy their widgets with. And when that happens, they have nobody to sell widgets to. The entire house of cards is going to collapse. How do they not see this?
Well, some of them do. You know, there's Nick Hanauer, for example, who's written very eloquently in Politico. I've seen some of his stuff. And, you know, he's part of that 1%. But he has openly acknowledged that, you know, you've got to, you know, spread the pie out a little bit further so that you have a much more viable society, or else you're going to get something, you know, like a banana republic. I mean,
we might already be there. Let's be honest.
But you know, I always say that the inequality is, you leave aside the morality case, okay? You don't get an economy growing as efficiently or as robustly if more and more of the gains are being channeled to an increasingly small number of people, and those peoples in turn have the highest savings propensity. So it means that you don't get the same kind of bang for your fiscal buck. So you really want to spread the pie out, as you pointed out. Even Henry Ford, as revolting a man as he was in many respects, understood that he had to pay his workers a sufficiently high salary so that they can consume the fruits of their labor.
Right.
And if you don't have that, then again, you just get this serf economy.
Okay. 100% agree with that. I want to talk about MMT in a minute because you've been a champion of that and how that relates to what we're talking about here with debt and municipal bonds, et cetera. But I want to finish something up with Wall Street Bets because I think this is not only in the public eye right now and can be used as a teaching lesson for all the things that are wrong with our system. But now, do you feel, so I feel like the SEC is going to come down on these guys. They've already been painted by a villain. If you listen to half of the hosts on CNBC yesterday, the way they were talking about this, it was like, wah, poor hedge fund guy. Who do these uppity kids think they are? Like, I mean, really horrible language that they were using surrounding this. I think this is really hypocritical. Obviously, these are tactics that have been used by hedge funds for a long time. And they're just getting a taste of their own medicine, so to speak. But where do you see the SEC going with this? Because like you've mentioned, it's a revolving door. Most of the folks that are serving in the SEC have been investment bankers, right? They're Goldman Sachs.
Well, I mean, it's the last SEC. I mean, the SEC used to be a feared organization. When they said they were going to look after you, I mean, that actually provoked fear on the part of Wall Street institutions, and because it was a credible sheriff, it tended to curb a lot of these egregious practices that you've described. Now, my hope is that with someone like Gary Gensler there, you'll get a return to that kind of regulatory zeal. At least that's what I hope, because he certainly has shown a good record there. And as I say, he's already independently wealthy, so he doesn't have to worry about what could happen afterwards. I think he really genuinely wants to do the right thing. He consulted before he took the CFTC job. He consulted with Brooks Lee Bourne, who in the late 1990s was running the CFTC, and actually at the time called for the regulation of these over-the-counter derivatives, and she was ignored by both Robert Rubin and Larry Summers. So Gary comes from good stock, and I think I'm confident that he'll do a good job. But he's the first one since, I would say, Stanley Sporkin. So you're talking about way back in the early 80s. We've had almost 40 years of non-regulation, and so it's going to be a shock to a lot of people that there is a new sheriff in town.
All right, I will need to be convinced that this guy's good stock, but I will take that into consideration.
Yeah, he's got good bona fides. I can't predict what he'll do in the future, but I'm more hopeful about his appointment than a lot of the other people. And I would also say
it could be worse. And
I think Janet Yellen also in that regard she's not a creature of Wall Street. I know people said, oh, well, she made $7 million in speaking fees over the last years. I sort of said that she's a piker compared to Bob Rubin or Larry Summers.
Larry Summers is a real piece of work. We can talk about him in a second.
Exactly. So I think they're of a different order of magnitude, and I think you will start seeing some cultural changes, which will be very good for our society. Unfortunately, I still think there is likely to be a crash at some point, which will not be good for anybody. It's the dynamics are already in play, and I think that's baked in the cake.
So in your opinion, have the Wall Street Bets folks done anything that can be qualified as illegal, like truly illegal? Because even if hedge funds have been doing the same thing and getting away for it forever, it doesn't mean that it's not illegal. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you're not allowed to form pools and manipulate stocks. That is against the rules. I mean, you're laughing justifiably so, because I mean we've had that for decades. The problem has not been that the rules are there, but nobody's really enforced them.
Exactly.
But there's been loads of rules against fraud as well, and how many people got prosecuted for that in 2008? So
Zero.
I mean, it's not a problem of the fact that we don't have a regulatory framework. It's the fact that, I mean, to some extent we've eviscerated large parts of the framework, but the other problem is that even what's left on the books isn't being enforced anymore.
Right. So now let me say this then. If they choose to enforce these laws that they have not enforced on hedge funds for decades now, not enforced on the billionaire class, if they choose to enforce these laws on these folks, these Reddit folks now, I think we're going to see a lot of civil unrest, because this is absolutely not fair.
I agree, and what makes it even more troubling and worrisome is the fact that it's really a form of generational warfare, because these guys that are the hedge funds, the guys who run Wall Street, indeed the people who run Washington right now, they're boomers, it's a gerontocracy. These guys who are the Reddit crowd, that's largely millennials,
Right.
Generation Zers. So there is an interesting dynamic there. And then, of course, that all can be amplified by social media. So it's very, very, if we do ultimately get a stock market bust, you're talking about a generation of younger people that have really suffered through one financial setback after another, 2008, COVID. And if there's a stock market collapse on top of that, then yeah, I agree with you. I said to someone earlier that I thought, they would make the protests we had last summer seem like a Disney
Nothing.
movie by comparison.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's right.
And they would be right to do that, because it's
Yeah.
it's,
I mean, the interesting thing is, does that lead to the conditions where you ultimately get a President Ocasio-Cortez? I mean, who knows? I mean, that's an interesting thought too.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so here you have an example of a group of folks taking down a hedge fund guy, one hedge fund guy. Over here, we have Wall Street banksters that have taken down an entire system that a lot of Americans paid for personally, whether it was through losing their homes or whatever else. So I think the dichotomy between these two things is huge. And if they choose to apply the rules on these guys while ignoring them for years on these guys, it's going to get ugly.
No, I agree. Look, they also went after Bernie Madoff, but he stole from rich people.
Right.
So I mean, it often starts that way. But as I said, if this activity, I mean, it did lead to some troubling declines in the markets. But if this activity ultimately, blows the a speculative bubble apart, then everyone is going to be affected by it, and then there will be a reckoning at some
There will
point.
be a reckoning.
I don't think that there will be a repeat of what you had in 2008, where the whole creditor class and the 1%ers basically got paid out 100 cents on the dollar. I think it's going to be a very, very different situation.
Oh, yeah.
There's
We're
too much
gonna see
misery
guillotines.
with COVID and everything else. So yeah.
I'm talking about my $600 went into buying a guillotine. That's where we're at. So let me ask you this. Were they using any option trading when they did this, or was it just your standard short squeeze that they engaged in?
No, it's possible that they did both. I mean,
Okay.
look, you've got all these instruments have now been democratized, which I don't think is a good thing, because it takes.
Let's talk about that for a second. Do you think it's a bad thing because a lot of people don't understand the intricacies of options trading?
Yes.
Or they don't understand the risk involved?
Both.
Both,
I mean,
okay.
it's like kids playing with Semtex. It's just you can say, well, bombs are, everyone should be allowed to use them. I mean, they're out
That's
there
fair.
for everyone. So I mean, but no, I think there is a certain degree of training and expertise that comes into it. You don't let a 5-year-old do heart surgery. So I do think you do that's a legitimate criticism that's been made, and I think that's one of the areas where the so-called democratization of finance has been a bad thing.
Well, it almost seems like it could be sort of classified as a form of predatory lending, especially if they're trading on margin accounts too.
Not as a form, it is predatory lending.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Because it is complicated if you don't know what you're doing. And it is risky. I mean, if you're short selling, there's no cap on your loss. You have to cover that position at some point.
Yes, and as someone who has been at the, I was a portfolio manager some years ago, and I've been at the receiving ends of one of those short squeezes. So it can be painful. So you got to be on your toes, but you also got to realize that you are exposed to potentially unlimited liability, and that's not a comfortable position for any person who's running money to be in.
Right. All right. I want to kind of change course for a second and talk about some of the tactics that hedge funds do use that these guys would not be able to use. Like quant trading is become sort of just garden variety trading at this point, I would say, on Wall Street. And these are when mathematicians create modeling where they're basically making money on the slight differences between trades, and they're doing it based on timing, right? So again, that would take money that these guys don't have to build out a computer system. And I think they even had arguments at one point where they wanted to get their server farms as close to Wall Street as possible so they could save time on when those trades are getting into getting
Yeah, the
placed.
high frequency of trading is part of it, and to me that has no social utility. I mean, the fact that you can get your trade done in 5 seconds rather than 2 minutes is a bit of a joke. But but that's not the only part of it. I mean, as you say, there are people. You have these quants and mathematicians, these literally in some cases rocket scientists who've devised algorithms that they use to help generate track inefficiencies in the market. Renaissance Capital is one of them. Although interestingly enough, the people behind Renaissance Capital generally give money back to investors because they find that they can't scale that to too large a size, and so I think that suggests that there is a fundamental instability there, which would suggest that look, I think a lot of these derivatives ought to become a little bit more plain vanilla and less complex. They would be ultimately lead to a more stable system.
And you're not wrong about being rocket scientists. I actually interviewed a Goldman Sachs quant trader, and his degree was in physics from Yale.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad that that our leading there's talk always about how there's a skill shortage in the United States. We don't have enough STEM workers. Well, we do, but the problem is that they work on Wall Street. So it's a misallocation of our brain power.
Yeah, there was no way he was ever going to make the same amount of money working anywhere else, which is
that's right.
Ridiculous.
So the incentives are heavily skewed in the wrong direction, and it's going to take a while to change that if we do it at all.
Right. So also, I'm going to look over here at our chats. If folks have any questions for Marshall while we're live here, please go ahead and type them in, and I will get them to him. It goes by really fast. So if you've asked one previously and I haven't seen it, stick your hand up again. I want to talk a little bit about MMT theory because you've been a champion of this. Where you work is absolutely a champion of it. This is a newer theory that hasn't really been grasped by everybody in leading institutions. But I think it's important because we need to get away from austerity for the masses, because obviously this is not serving our system well at all. So how would you say MMT would change the way, for example, you're talking about the Fed backing corporate bonds but not backing municipal bonds? I think this would be a prime example of where something could be changed. What are your thoughts on that?
It's certainly got a lot more. It's been popularized. I mean, when I first started talking to you about MMT, i.e., modern monetary theory, about 15 years ago, we were considered economic quacks, and the people that were behind it, people like Stephanie Kelton, Randy Ray, Warren Mosler, Bill Mitchell, Scott Fullerweiler, a whole bunch of them. They were basically teaching in the equivalent of academic Siberia. They weren't, and so things have changed. I mean, Stephanie has become a bit of a rock star economist, which is great. She was offered some did some economic advisory work for the Sanders campaign. But I think, I think in one sense we have won the battle to the extent that this sense of an arbitrary financial constraint, that there's a number that you can't go past or else it's bad. I think we've moved away from that. I mean, even the IMF today is saying levels of debt, don't worry about that. You've got to spend. So but I also want to stress that the MMTers have never said deficits don't matter. They do matter. We're highly cognizant of the real resource constraints, the inflationary constraints. So you talk to any MMTer, if you've got a full-blooded economy that's running red hot, no unemployment, and inflation is running at 5-6%, then sure, we're going to be the first to say tax these guys a little bit more to cool down the economy. So to that extent, you don't want to be running large deficits or in that kind of environment. So, and I think that's important. And I think the other thing is that people would say, well, Donald Trump spent a lot of money too, but I think there are distributional aspects. Where are you deploying those deficits? That's the other thing that I think we really need to be mindful of.
Okay, so I have a bunch of questions now that I asked that I've been madly writing down here for you, Marshall.
Okay.
The first one is, can Wall Street be tied to Main Street? Is that something that can happen? And I think the reason this person's asking that is it might supply some sort of system of checks and balances to what these guys are doing all the time. Right now, they're just gambling at a casino, and there's absolutely no accountability or repercussions for what they do.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I agree with the premise of the question, namely that Wall Street is completely detached from Main Street, and that what goes on in the market has very little bearing on economic reality right now. So I think to the extent that we can get funding or investment banking back towards, being a provision of capital to worthy growth companies, as opposed to, speculation and actually betting against the clients that you might be funding, extending loans to in the market. If we can do that, then we can reintegrate it so that Wall Street is consistent with the broader public purpose. But it would take, I think, part of that would take restricting a range of activities where Wall Street people now make a ton of money. So that's going to be very, very politically difficult.
Yeah, no, that's true. So, and then another question was in regards to what about the market, I think, is considering halting buys but allowing sells. Do you think that that's a good way of handling this?
Ultimately, that's just defers the problem. I mean, you want to have a market where you can buy and sell. I don't believe, the liberal in me doesn't like the idea of arbitrarily restricting stuff. I mean, we've got circuit breakers, which make sense. But
please explain what those are for folks that don't know what you mean by that.
It's basically the equivalent of a timeout. So you basically say, okay, we're going to just cool down the market for 15, 20 minutes so that people can aren't operating in a mad blind panic. They were introduced largely after the '87 crash. So I think they're a good idea, and maybe and of course, I think the rule is that if you have the circuit breakers triggered 3 times in a day, then you do suspend trading that day, and so it effectively puts sand in the gears, and I think that's sensible. But I don't think like some of this talk I've heard, of you closing down the market for a month until you get this sorted out. If that's what happens, then you can forget about having a functioning capital market. Arguably, some people would say that's not a bad thing, but I'm just pointing out, be careful what you wish for.
All right, fair enough. I mean, I'm sort of the person at this point that capitalism has run its course. We need to look at different economic systems.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, look, if you don't want, if your view is that the market mechanism is not the most efficient way to allocate resources and govern activity, then sure, you don't really care if the stock market goes. But if you want to, if you think that we can do that, you at the very least you want to align market activity, harness it in a way towards that it achieves more effective social delivery.
Right, which is fair enough. And then we had several questions about what happens to Robinhood. What kind of things do you think they're going to face if the SEC does choose to go after them? So we're not talking about the civil unrest that might ensue from the public.
Yeah, that might happen. I guess King John will come after them and and stop that. No, I think that this is if they lose enough money in the event of a big fall, then you're going to get considerably less enthusiasm going forward. I mean, I think that there has to be more scrutiny and regulation of these kinds of day trading activities for people's own financial health. But I think this will provoke some sort of regulatory backlash and the freedoms that they have right now. I mean, I know a lot of them will say, well, this is not fair. It's a free market, blah, blah, blah. You should be able to do whatever I want. A lot of these guys are libertarian enthusiasts, but, we don't have a free market in any sense of the word. So, that argument doesn't really hold water with me.
No, it doesn't hold water with me either. So, so in your opinion, you don't think they're really going to go after any sort of criminal charges against the Robinhood guys?
I doubt it. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of them might actually find that they've lost money when this is all over. So, the people that were buying GameStop at $300 might find themselves in a fairly...
Oh, they're in trouble, yeah.
Position. Yeah.
I don't disagree with you there.
Yeah.
All right, so now that I brought that up, we're going to have to talk about it. What does a post-capitalist America look like?
Oh, well, interesting question. I think we're already in a post-capitalist America. In the sense that, the idea that we have a free market with minimal government interference or government involvement, that ship has sailed a long time ago. We have a big state. Unfortunately, too much of it is deployed towards the military, and but if you actually look at there's a very good book written in about 12 years ago by Jamie Galbraith, a friend of mine, The Predator State, and he points out that the market, the government has been actively involved in markets for a long time. My feeling has always been you want to deploy that government power towards shaping the markets towards national developmental incomes. or outcomes rather, and helping incomes thereby. But look, Operation Warp Speed, just to give you one recent example, had a lot of problems with it. But what was, I think, one of the better things that happened was that the government did commit to funding a lot of these companies, and as a result of that backstop, the vaccines were created in record time. You know, all the experts were saying we're not going to have a vaccine for this coronavirus for years, and we did it in less than a year. So the government played a huge role there, and that's the kind of thing that I would like to see government doing going forward. Not just simply talking about it as a neutral umpire safeguarding the operation of markets, but actually taking an active role in shaping outcomes. That's what they do in East Asia, in Japan, South Korea, in China, and that's why they're eating our lunch right now.
Oh, and they absolutely are. And interestingly enough, it's almost a throwback to what government was under FDR and Eisenhower.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
polio
that's right.
vaccine was fully financed by the government.
We have that in the U.S. Right from the days of Alexander Hamilton. There has been never a time in our history until the 1980s where the state did not play a very important role in national economic development. In a host of areas, you know, in healthcare. Look, the internet is a government-funded creation. Just as an example, we allow virtually all the royalties and fruits of that research to accrue totally to Silicon Valley, but there's no reason why that has to be the case going forward. There's a very good book by Mariana Mazzucato, The Entrepreneurial State, where she talks about this quite a lot.
No, and I agree with that. We can't continue what we're doing. What we're doing is not only untenable economically, it's absolutely immoral. You know, and I think in many ways, the pandemic has sort of endorsed that. Another thing we can look at is the fact that Americans have not had any real help from the government as far as getting by during this pandemic. All of Europe, Canada, there's some sort of UBI system in place where folks are getting a monthly check from the government to stay home. And, you know, in the United States, they send out a $600 check, which is not even enough to throw a pizza party. And that's supposed to be some big
that's right.
whoop.
I mean, you know, if you're going to, for reasons of public health, you're going to try to undertake pandemic mitigation, and to do so means shutting down large swaths of the economy, then the only way you're going to sustain public support for that kind of program is to provide a generous floor. So it means paying people to stay at home. That's what they did in Europe, as you say. Some places went as far as nationalizing payroll in places like Norway and Denmark, and that's really what I think we should have done here, rather than extending these massive bailouts to large corporations, which is, I think, a more top-down, trickle-down nonsense.
It's absolute nonsense. And the problem is you're right, since the 80s, and I would say really I'd go back to the early 70s. I think you can go back to the Powell memo as sort of a point of reference. But the idea of neoliberal privatization of everything, thinking that the market can be a moral arbiter of anything, because that's really what's at the heart of all of these philosophies, right? The market's the moral arbiter. It's led us into some very dark places in this country, and it's just not tenable. It hasn't been tenable for a long time. I mean, the fact that now we're talking about having a minimum wage bill, $15 by 2025. Are you kidding me? That ship sailed. It should be $30 an hour. We should be fighting for 30 at this point.
Yeah, no, that's right. And a whole sorts of other things. I mean, I'm encouraged that we're at least having this discussion, and that there is an effort to make moves, serious moves. I think Biden's package that he's introduced, of course, going to be chopped down by Congress, but it's actually pretty good compared to where we were in the past.
Hey, I will say this: his thus far he's been more progressive than I thought he would be. So I think he's feeling the pressure of the activists.
Less so in healthcare, but certainly as far as on economic stimulus, I've been pleasantly surprised by him, and the fact that we've got Bernie on the budget committee, at least so long as the
and
Democrats
we have Ed Markey out there fighting for it too now. So Ed, I don't know, Ed's really become a very bold voice in this discussion. I'm happy to see that.
The wind is definitely at the backs of the progressives in a way it hasn't been for a long time. So I think that's an encouraging consideration.
I do. In fact, my next question for you is about Biden's health proposal, because I think it's appalling. His health proposal is just another giant handout to healthcare insurers across the board.
Yeah.
What's going on here? We have Medicare for All is I think this needs to be said over and over again. Medicare for All is a policy that is supported by a plurality of voters, right? Not just Democratic voters, voters in both parties. It is supported by a plurality of voters. So the fact that we have Congress people and a president that doesn't seem to want to acknowledge that is frightful to me. Who are they doing the work for? Because it's obviously not their constituency.
Well, their constituency are the large pharmaceutical and health insurance companies, and they comprise about 15% of GDP. So they're very formidable opposition. And that's why I think Medicare for All will be extremely difficult politically to introduce. But there are other things you can do. I mean, you can introduce all payer systems, for example, where you effectively negotiate pay schedules for a variety of procedures to healthcare providers, where all insurers, effectively set a price that's negotiated with the government to pay for certain services. They do this in Germany, for example. Very few countries, I think the UK and Canada, have an exclusively single payer system. The main thing is, though, you don't, and Medicare is a single payer in its own way. But the main thing is you want to be able to have these larger consumers of healthcare acting, using their power as bulk purchasers to keep prices down, and they don't do that. That's the real problem. And Biden's proposal, as you say, don't really address that. He's just saying, well, let's give more subsidies for employer-funded healthcare, and
COBRA, which is totally unaffordable.
That doesn't help people who are unemployed, and it doesn't, and it's subsidizing the most expensive healthcare plans there are. So it's not a good proposal.
It's a terrible proposal. Again, it's just a giant handout to healthcare insurers. The profiteering that we see in our system is just unbelievable to me.
And it doesn't even give you value for money. That's the other point.
None.
Our health outcomes are far worse than they are in almost every other major OECD country. So
that's right.
That's another thing. No value for money.
No value for money. We're nowhere in, and I love it when people say, "But we get better healthcare here." No, we don't, folks.
No,
we actually don't.
No, that's the only people that say that have never experienced another healthcare system. I've experienced healthcare in France, the UK, Canada, and I can assure you that it's much better.
It is much better. It absolutely is better. So that's an area that's very troubling to me, and I think it's an area that activists are going to have to keep on pushing away at, because we're not getting heard. And it just blows my mind, though, because this is the one policy that is needed so badly across the board.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
This is it. This is
going to be a tough one. But if the pandemic has exposed anything, it's that there's an inherent problem with our existing healthcare provision. You can't mitigate a pandemic if as a consequence of mitigating the pandemic, the collateral damages, you cut people off from their healthcare access. So, which is actually what's happened to a lot of people. So that's the conundrum that Biden must confront at some point.
I don't think he's going to. It angers me.
Doesn't look like it so far, unfortunately. So but we'll see.
We have socialism for the rich. Yes, that's correct. I agree with that sentiment. What are you writing about currently? I wanted to ask you. We have a few minutes left here to talk. By the way, I just want to let all of the Status Coup audience know that John Farina is going to be live streaming from Wall Street later on this evening, so you're going to want to tune in for that. But in the meantime, what are you working on right now? What is on your desk?
I just wrote a piece on healthcare, actually. Okay. And I've joined the legion of people that are on Substack. There's a group of us called the Scrum. Okay. Myself, Patrick Lawrence, and James Carden. So we write on a host of issues. So go on there, subscribe. It'll cost you a beer, So it's
worth it.
Yeah, exactly, per month. So you can probably afford that. But yeah, and there's Muckrack has my stuff on they collate things, but I write for Alternate, Salon, The Nation. But yeah, it's all on Substack right now, so you can read it and take a look at some of the. As I say, I literally just wrote a piece on healthcare.
What is your piece about on healthcare?
What we just discussed, that Biden, the shortcomings in Biden's proposal, and why we should be moving to an all-payer system as a possible alternative if we can't get Medicare for all.
Right. Well, let me ask you a question. You know, in Canada, they went district by district to get their universal health care system. It didn't happen on the national level. Is that something that maybe we should be doing in the United States, where we go state by state? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, you're right. It started in Saskatchewan and gradually extended across the country, and it did have encounter formidable opposition from the Canadian Medical Association, but they lost. You know, I'm a great believer that the states should be social laboratories for, you know, a lot of different social experiments. The problem is that those in the past have generally been, you know, only when they do things that are right-wing policies, you know. When it's, you know, you try to get single payer introduced in a state,
It gets shut down.
Look at what happened in California.
Exactly.
But the other problem is that if you're going to do that, you need help from the federal government, because they are the issue of the currency. So if you're going to have Medicare for all in a state like California, you probably need to introduce some element of per capita revenue sharing distribution from the federal government. And if you did it on a per capita basis, all the states can receive it. California would get the largest share, of course, but that would be the way. You'd have to fund it nationally, even if you did it on a state-by-state basis.
Okay, that makes sense. So thanks for coming on, Marshall.
My pleasure,
it's been
Tina.
great.
Always great to see you.
I hope people have a more a broader understanding, so to speak, of what happened with WallStreetBets and some of the other things we're looking at financially. So also, I want to mention that tomorrow I'm going to be covering the live stream, and we're going to be focusing on right-wing militia, 3%ers, Boogaloo Boys, Proud Boys. I have a special guest that's going to come on that's an expert in this area, and we're going to be doing a breakdown of all of these various sects so that people understand who these folks are. As you guys saw earlier, I did a report on Gina from Beverly Hills, who was part of the insurrection at the Capitol. And what we're finding is a good chunk of those people involved were from California. I'm not shocked by this. I know other people in other parts of the country might be like, "What, California?" But we have a lot of right-wing things here, including Nazis. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So, but anyway, thank you for joining me today, Marshall. Make sure everybody goes to watch John Farina's live stream tonight. He's going to be live streaming in front of Wall Street. I think that's going to be amazing to watch, because who knows how much civil unrest will be entailed in that. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. And congratulations on us hitting 108,000 subscribers. That's an amazing milestone. Thanks for joining me.